was justified. At no point did I ever say that. So by trying to put words in my mouth like that, you're being completely intellectually dishonest. I said that China's economic achievements as the result of its central planned economy were good. And I think 800 million people lifted out of poverty, the construction of a modern country, one of the poorest countries in the world, becoming the second largest economy in the world, is a good thing. Whenever an innocent person is killed, whenever economic policies are problematic and have negative results, that's a bad thing. Please don't try to paint me as an apologist for mass murder to cover up the reality of what I'm saying. I'm pointing toward economic successes. I'm pointing toward real achievements, and you are pointing to human rights violations and atrocities to discredit that. I just read you all these crimes of capitalism, and then you said that's not real capitalism.
No, I condemn those crimes.
I think capitalism exists in the world today.
Perpetuated. I don't agree with you about the
I
Bengal
think
one
that
in the
socialism
Second World War,
exists in the world today.
I condemn those crimes as being perpetuated by the state, and this is one of the reasons why a stateless society is the ideal. But you, look, you've got to understand how you come across to anyone with any kind of moral center. Is you're saying, well, okay, yes, 77 million people were slaughtered by the Soviet government, but fuck, man, they built some really nice spaceships, and you know, they built some tractors, and there was some canals and shit, and I'm just telling you, like, from outside your, like, ideological bubble, that looks completely sociopathic, which is like, okay, 77 million people killed here, 62 million people killed in the Soviet Union, but, you know, there was some good GDP numbers. And, you know, this is the thing I find so kind of strange and surreal about these conversations, is that, like, every one of those 77 million people, every one in China, every one of those 62 million people in the USSR, they wanted to live just as much as you and I do, right? And you don't kill yourself in order to raise the GDP. Now, you could, right? You could, I don't know, I'm not saying you ever would or should or anything like that, but theoretically, right, you could strap a bunch of explosives on, you could blow up a building, and then they'd have to repair that building, and they'd spend a lot of money, and that would increase the GDP. So you could kill yourself to increase the GDP. You could set fire to yourself in front of a library and get more people interested in communism and socialism as a result of the resulting publicity. But you don't do that because your life is extremely valuable to you, and even though it might increase the GDP for your life to end, you don't want that to happen. So the sociopathic element to me of this conversation is you saying, well, okay, yeah, 130, 140 million people killed, but GDP went up, and some people learned how to read, and there was some electricity that went to new places, and blah, 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 blah. But you wouldn't want to be one of those 130 million people. You value your own life, you care for your own life, and you're not willing to sacrifice your own life for a potential increase in communist GDP. But the degree to which you just don't seem to recognize that each one of those 120, 130 million people had just as strong a hunger for life. We're not talking human rights violations. We're talking about absolute multi-tens of millions of mass slaughter. That's not like violations of human rights or hate speech laws or something. Like, come on. We're talking about some, like, incredible mountains of bodies, the likes of which have never been seen before. And that's almost the kind of surprising thing to me, is that those people all wanted to live. They all wanted to go home and kiss their children. They all wanted to pursue their dreams and pick up painting in their old age, and they were just slaughtered by communist governments. And I don't know that, you know, a couple of % increase in the GDP over a decade is something that's worth those bodies.
May I respond without interruption? Okay, I guess that's a yes. Would you pile the same kind of moral condemnation you did on me for recognizing that socialism has economic successes onto someone who waves the American flag? Right? Are they then celebrating the slaughter of people, the indigenous people, the slaughter, the slavery, the millions of deaths on the transatlantic slave trade? Are they celebrating the Vietnam War and the Korean War? You know, I eat Thanksgiving dinner with my family. I don't do that because I'm looking over and denying the humanity of Native Americans. I do that because I can recognize that good things existed in this country despite the evil, horrible, racist things that went on. right? Is every British person who's patriotic, are they ignoring all those famines I just read? Is every French person who sings the La Marseillaise, are they celebrating the death of 2 million people who died when free trade economics was imposed on France after World War II in 1945, or on Vietnam, I mean, the Vietnamese colonialists? I mean, if you're going to condemn me for saying that the Soviet Union had economic successes and say that I don't understand that the people who died have life, you can pour that condemnation onto every Western country. Are people in Belgium who wave their own flag, are they morally atrocious because they don't recognize that King Leopold killed 10 to 15 million people and worked them to death in rubber plantations? I'm sorry. I have said over and over again that I condemn any violation of human rights. I condemn any unnecessary death of innocent people. And you are sticking to this old anti-communist cliche. Communism, you just throw out this body count, as if capitalism doesn't have a body count that's just as big. And then your response when I point to capitalism's crimes is to say, well, that's not real capitalism. Okay, so pour that condemnation on anyone who celebrates the achievement of the West, because the West is responsible for mass death and mass killing and mass torture and mass enslavement, right? This is the reality. I mean, is someone who drives a Japanese car responsible for the crimes of Japan at Nanking or in the Philippines? I mean, we can learn from the good and the bad of economic systems. I mean, this is unfair, and you only get away with it because you're appealing to a popular narrative. You're supposed to be a revolutionary, Stefan. You present yourself as this bold, brave revolutionary who's sticking it to the man and fighting the system. You want a world without a government and all this. This is all stuff I hear on CNN. The United States goes around the world liberating people from brutal regimes and spreading freedom. China is an evil country violating human rights. Saudi Arabia, we're not going to talk about. Russia is an evil country violating human rights. We're not going to talk about, the government in Kiev that's tearing down World War II monuments and repressing people. You're just throwing out every old anti-communist cliche. In my government school, you think government schools are communist propaganda. In my government school, I learned all of this. We watched movies about Holodomor. We heard nothing but, you would have gotten the impression that the entire history of the Soviet Union was nothing but gulags and death camps. That's what I learned in my government school. There's nothing at all bold about any of this. This is just standard regime change, demonization of some countries, glossing over the crimes of other countries propaganda.